There's a lot of concern recently about the tech space. Tech is still around and it's still going to be around for as long as we can see. In the future, there is the software engineering job. They're not going away in spite of what we are seeing in the market. Sometimes it's hard to see the actual data because based on what gets more attention in the news, and that kind of sways the opinion of people. But if you start looking at the data, that's where you actually get a better sense. A lot of these companies are still talking about recruiting challenges, especially like in the AI field, machine learning, cloud technologies, and others. There's still gaps. So it's not like any of these are going away or have gone away. That's not happening. All right, so let's get started. And the first thing I guess we wanted to address here is there's a lot of concern recently about the tech job market. And if you look at the numbers, in spite of all that's happening, there still is, tech is still around and it's still going to be around for as long as we can see in the future. And there is growth in the jobs and there is more focus on, sure, maybe the AI has some more focus recently, but that's still in the tech domain. And then the software engineering job, they're not going away in spite of what we are seeing in the market. Talking about some surveys that Deloitte has done, a lot of these companies are still talking about recruiting challenges, especially like in the AI field, machine learning, cloud technologies, and others. There's still gaps. So it's not like any of these are going away or have gone away. That's not happening. That's something we kind of wanted to just share some data here in the beginning, just to allay concerns about people.
If you are liking this video, then you love what I have to say next. You can spend months learning agentic AI or cut that time into half with a structured program by Interview Kickstart, where you actually build and ship two AI agents into production with a mentor from Faang guiding you through every step. It's called Agentic AI Career Boost Program. And if you think it's just another generic course, spoiler alert, it's not. It's customizable depending on your domain. Engineers, you have a Python-based AI engineering path. If you're a PM or a manager, you take no-code, low-code use case path. And both paths could be paired with Faang interview prep for AI-driven roles. But the best way to learn more about this program is through the free webinar. Here you can get all the details about the program, ask your questions, and see if it's the right fit for you. And if it is, you'll be joining a company of 25,000 professionals who have already leveled up through Interview Kickstart. Many now at Faang, Anthropic, OpenAI, already crossing 300K plus. And here is what some of them say. I'll put the link to the free webinar in the description, as well as pin it in the comments so you don't miss it. See you all there.
Okay, so next, with that, backdrop, let's talk about the skills that are required to get into these roles. And we are talking about here backend, front end, full stack, test roles and such. If you look at, for example, let's start with the backend engineering roles. The kind of skills that you would need are like distributed systems, as we know. That's kind of a given here. And things like your knowledge and experience with microservices, where you can talk about scalability, trade, and the various distributed system patterns, such as this mentions a couple of things there. It mentions load balancing communication patterns, but these are obviously the lists that you see here are not exhaustive. That's just some examples, but there is, you can expect to be interviewed on like database storage, like SQL, ACID, replication sharding, hotspots, all these, and then of course on the API side as well. So these are some representative bullet points here, not exhaustive. But the point here is that as long as you are comfortable in these technologies, you can expect to be doing well in the interviews. When I say comfortable in these technologies, I don't necessarily mean that, let's say, there's the system design interviews and there's a bunch of these prompts. Obviously, nobody has. There's like n number of prompts where n is greater than 30, right? The design prompts that get asked in interviews. Obviously, we don't have anyone who's built all of those, right? And so when I say you need to have knowledge and experience, I'm not trying to say that you have to have built a lot of these systems. You may have built some, but a lot of this knowledge then comes from reading and blogs and courses like Interview Kickstart courses and such, right? And that's once you go through all of that, then that just improves your fundamental knowledge on these systems, and then the pros and cons and the trade-offs and such. And that's where all of this comes from. And that's true for obviously not just backend engineering, but any of these domains. And then concurrency, perf optimizations, and cloud infra, et cetera, et cetera. Again, so these are, like I said, not necessarily exhaustive, but these are the kind of skills that they would be looking for. If we look at full stack engineers now, full stack, of course, so they have knowledge on the front end, they have knowledge on the back end as well. So there's back end engineers, there's full stack engineers, and then there's front end engineers. And as the name suggests, full stack would be working on both back and front. Again, I'm not gonna read through all of these names. That I'm sure a lot of these names anyway, but the idea is, again, so for full stack engineers, you have to be proficient on a lot of these front-end technologies in addition to, of course, backend, right? And also this, again, lists some areas that might come up in interviews, or other way to look at it is these are the kind of skills you need to have, or the knowledge that you need to have. Again, you may not have worked on every single thing. So when I say skills, what I mean in general is this is part of your experience and or knowledge which you've picked up based on either working on some maybe academic projects, maybe some people have their own pet projects which are not related to the work that they're doing necessarily, or reading blogs or from courses such as IK and such, right? So front-end engineering skills, similarly, a lot of these, so of course, these people, they're more familiar with the front-end frameworks, maybe less familiar with backend and such, okay? And then testing, we mentioned testing here. Of course, testing applies to all roles. From a test perspective, there's two ways to look at it. There's a specifically like a test role as that, but then companies that may or may not necessarily have a specific test role, they will have their roles, which will be expected to do testing as well. So it is, as we know, a few years ago, there was a shift in the industry where the test roles, sometimes in some companies, a lot of the test roles, I'm not going to say necessarily 100%, but a lot of the test roles got absorbed by the dev side. But some of the test roles still do exist in many companies, as we know, right? So, but that's having a testing mindset is absolutely essential, and even for people who are just working on the dev side. And so this one is talking about the SDET or test engineer roles. And here, so there's two ways to look at it. People who are devs, but they're also, of course, testing their code. You can no longer say for a few years now, you can no longer say, hey, I wrote the code and somebody else is going to test it. That doesn't fly. Like I said, for quite a few years now. But then somebody who is actually in this SDET role would have a lot better and deeper understanding of the frameworks and the methodologies, et cetera, et cetera. And that's, if that is you, if that's the role that you're applying for, then you should expect to have a really good handle in these technologies in this domain, right? Because that then is the strong point. And automation, of course, is key. We are not necessarily talking about manual testing. I think those roles they keep getting smaller and smaller, and probably, I don't know, maybe non-existent. So it's all about automation because that's what scales. So let's see, 1 second. Hey, Rohan, I was just opening my chat window, or if you see any question that I might have missed, just...
I will do. There's two pieces that are coming in, Sanjeev, a lot is in terms of, will the slides be shared? Yes, they will be shared. Try joining our communities. We'll be sending all the resources there. In terms of other piece where you folks haven't received any of the resources, I didn't show all of you get it, and I'll just share it, the link in chat and on the community as well. Sorry, Sanjeev, I just keep coming in and salesy things, but...
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you, Rohan. All right. So continuing on, again, this is still an SDET role. So debugging, quality mindset, of course, like I said, if that's your role, and these are key things that you could talk about in your, or you need to have knowledge on, so you're able to clearly communicate. The last point here says communication collaboration, but this one is specifically talking with respect to SDET. But of course, as we know, communication collaboration is a horizontal signal and a horizontal skill that anybody would need to have. I just want to say one thing here with respect to communication. Communication is extremely important, because that a lot of times what happens is people are technically sound, but the communication is an issue. And if that happens, then that really makes it really hard. Okay. So, but then one part of communication is when I mean communication, I do not mean how well somebody speaks, or I don't mean about English being their primary language. That is not what it is, right? Communication is about, are you able to get, are you confident in what you're talking about? Are you giving the information in an organized manner, right? So it's about that. It's not about English being your primary language, or the accent, or necessarily the grammar, and although you could say those things help, but it's primarily about, especially for leadership roles like senior engineers, staff engineers, engineering managers, are you able to, would you be able to communicate the information to junior engineers? Would you be able to kind of mentor them? And so that becomes a key signal. So I just kind of wanted to digress on that a little bit, but that applies, it's horizontal across every role, and obviously not just instead. Okay. So let's go on to this next section here with touching upon AI. And as we know, for the last couple of years now, AI has entered the scene, and there's a lot of talk about AI. There's a lot of confusion about AI, even in companies, not just in candidates, but even in companies, there's a lot of confusion about where this is going, how to effectively make use of it, and such, right? So what I want to say is, sorry, kind of getting ahead of myself. There's also talk about a lot of reports coming out, hey, AI is not useful. Some percentage of companies haven't been able to use it effectively, monetize it, blah, 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 right? I know, I'm aware of all that, right? We've all seen a lot of such articles. My opinion is AI, and hopefully a lot of you also share that same opinion. AI is here to stay. It isn't going away. It is useful. People are seeing the benefits of it, right? When you see these articles about companies are not seeing the benefit, they are talking about in a much higher level. If companies invest millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, how much of a return are they seeing? So they're looking at it from that perspective. But then somebody like me, for example, or probably you too, right? We are looking at it from the perspective of, is it making a change in my day-to-day life? Is it helping me move faster? And the answer for me is yes, right? Certainly is. In my mind, I equate it to, I don't know how many of you played this game, this Mario Kart game, or a video game, right? It's been around for many years. But AI tools, for me, equates to, like in Mario Kart game, when you pick up one of those power things, right? It helps you move faster, much faster, right? Now, can you put it on auto and like just pick up that thing and just sit back and it'll move for you? It doesn't, right? You'll just go crash. So you still need to control it, but it's basically helping you move a lot faster in the video game, right? So I look at AI kind of like that. I can't just let it on auto and say, hey, go do the work and I'm watching a movie or doing something else. No, I can't do that. But I still have to pay attention. I still am in control, but it's helping me move really fast, right? So from that perspective, AI is here to stay, and so upskilling is a given. It is expected. If you're in an interview, should you be AI aware? Absolutely, should be. But that doesn't mean that every person is an ML engineer or an AI engineer. That is not what it means, unless, of course, that is your domain. Then that's different. But in general, for SWEs, we have to be aware of AI, and we have to be fluent with AI from a usage perspective at the very least, right? And that's what we are trying to say here. And a lot of these surveys, they're showing you, yeah, people are getting AI aware in terms of trainings and such. Some numbers on adoption of AI, companies investing, using AI, and average salaries and such. So that's just FYI. Okay. Now, AI, of course, makes its way into all of these domains now. So for DevOps, anomaly detection is something that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. And that with respect to monitoring, observability, then anomaly detection kind of feeds into that for error rates or any issues that might be going on. So it detects anomalies, which may or may not necessarily show up as errors. If you take out the anomaly detection, for example, it may not show up as errors. So this anomaly detection is kind of an early warning system in a sense, right? Where it says, okay, something different is happening, and which eventually might lead into some errors, but this is trying to catch it at an anomaly level. And then there is API integration, data engineering, agentic AI. There's a lot of these things going on, right? So it certainly helps to get into the groove, so to speak, and pick up that knowledge again, whether that's through your experience or self-study, or whether it's through joining programs such as this IK programs. When I say IK, I mean Interview Kickstart. So that those are all your choices, but the end result has to be there. This is where AI is playing into the picture. Similarly, for full stack domain, there's AI all over, as you would expect. And again, I'm not going to drain the slide and go through each one of these bullets. They are more kind of representative, and you're seeing them anyway on the screen. All right. Front end, again, further AI design, UX enhancements, etc., etc. So I'll keep going. In test domain, AI, of course, is there still for testing, like building test cases or analysis of code, etc., etc. We had code analysis tools earlier. Now with AI, they are hopefully smarter and such, right? And yeah, so slide is to say that AI is everywhere, even in the test domain or backend or front end and full stack, right? Okay. So we'll keep going and talk a bit about the interview process. This is, again, this set of slides is generally talking about at a high level. They're broken down into like tier 1 and tier 2 and such. Oops, sorry. But at a high level, it is the process is very similar. You start with a recruiter contacts you. Either it's they contact you or you applied or it's a referral. Could be any of those cases. But there's a quick phone screen from the recruiter. They are just doing some basic checks. Is it a real person we are talking to? Or do they have the experience they claim to have, et cetera, et cetera. They're just doing that basic checks. Then comes the technical phone screen, which is done by either a hiring manager or another some engineer in the company. Or it could just be one of those tests where you log onto a site, for example, Hacker Rank, and they've given you a question. There's nobody there, no person is there. So it could be any of such cases, right? If there's a person there, then they are looking at how you solve the problem, how you communicate your thoughts, right? And such. So what I want to say there is a technical phone screen when when there's an actual person involved, you want to make sure that communication is on one of the I want to make sure you understand that communication is one of the things they'll be kind of judging you on. A technical phone screen, or for that matter, an actual on-site coding interview, is never only about solving the problem or writing the code. It's never only about that. That's kind of, you can assume that that's a minimum condition, qualifying condition, not as sufficient. I mean, because they're going to look at how you're communicating your thoughts and how you're approaching the problem. That is absolutely important. Now, that part doesn't get addressed if it's like a hacker rank test where there's nobody else there, but eventually they will get to it, right? At some point, you will talk to a human. Like, for example, on this slide, step 3, if you get to the on-site rounds, that is, humans are obviously involved. So again, communication and such, okay? The on-site loops will then have system design, coding, behavioral. This slide here says 2 to 3 coding rounds and 1 system design. I mean, the numbers, how many coding rounds and how many system designs are not important because that changes from a level to level. Like somebody applying for, say, a staff role, they will likely have 2 system designs instead of 1 system design, and probably 1 coding or maybe 2 codings, and definitely a behavioral leadership kind of interview. There are no fixed hard and fast rules. Things change and change across companies. So, but the higher you go, the more important your behavioral interview becomes, more important your system design interview becomes. For generally for people who are fresh out of college or maybe even like a couple of years experience, system design usually is not there. They will have more coding rounds. But as you go up the level, system design will start showing up, and maybe more than 1 system design interviews will show up. But the behavioral, etc., is always there for all the levels pretty much. One thing I want to add about behavioral here is, in my opinion, in my experience, behavioral is the least prepared interview somehow. And that is because people think that the technical interviews are more important, and they spend a lot of time doing that, and they underprepare for behavioral because a lot of times people think, oh, behavioral is they're going to ask me about projects I've done. And of course, I know that because I'm the person who's done it, right? True, you are the person who's has your work experience, whatever number of years it is. But in a behavioral interview, keep in mind what comes across and where most candidates actually fail is they're not able to concisely, with appropriate depth and the relevant points, they're not able to summarize that into like a 2-minute answer or a 4-minute answer, whatever the case might be, right? And clearly articulate that. So that's kind of where it starts making a difference. The person who's doing the behavioral interview, they've done like hundreds of behavioral interviews. So they are very experienced in that, and they can kind of sense, I don't know, sixth sense or whatever, but from experience, right? I mean, you can judge what the other person is saying. So basically what I'm trying to say is prepare for behavioral interviews, prepare your stories, your examples, your work examples. Think of the projects you've done, think of the relevant details, write them down. Okay. Write them down. And this is your cheat sheet where you put all your notes and everything and details of project, the relevant details of projects, right? Because you will get asked about those. And if you have those stories and the details fresh in your mind because you prepared, then obviously your communication is going to come across much better and you're not going to stumble and not be able to answer when they start digging into details. So, all right, so something to keep in mind. Anyway, so once that happens, the on-site happens, then like a hiring committee review, but the step hiring committee review, of course, varies from company to company. There's some companies have a very formal hiring committee. Other companies may not have a formal hiring committee where in those cases, it's more of the debrief that happens where the people who interviewed the candidate, they have a quick meeting and they kind of, they would have already given their response on whether it's a hire, no hire, strong hire, etc., weak hire. They will discuss that and then make a final decision. Some again, this is not an exhaustive list, but some reason why candidates might get rejected, technical issues. For Faang company, tier 1 companies, the bar is pretty high. They can afford to keep it high because so many people apply. And so when they have a huge choice, they are picky. Okay. Again, I want to mention what I said earlier. In a technical interview, it's not just about the actual technology or like, for example, in coding, it's not just about coding it up, right? A lot of other things go into play. Communication is one thing I mentioned. Other things are such as, once you wrote the code, did you proactively offer to test your code? Or did you just say, hey, I'm done, this should work? And then the interviewer says, hey, do you want to test it? Right? So the suggestion to test should come from you proactively. Don't wait for them to tell you. Did you point out the trade-offs, or in case of coding, for example, time and space complexities on your own? Again, you want to proactively talk about those things, the costs, right? The times, space, etc. The thing is, when you talk about these other things like trade-offs and the costs and all, or options, what you're showing is an engineering mindset. And these companies, especially the top companies, they're not looking to hire coders. They're looking to hire engineers, problem solvers. And so if you show an engineering mindset in addition to everything else, that obviously helps you. System design, yeah, some people, that's another important one we talked about. And the behavioral, right? So sometimes there might be red flags where the candidate blames the company or talks down about their current or the previous company, which is not a great thing to do. It doesn't get you anything except maybe negative points, maybe arrogance, etc., right? So I think a lot of these actually are obvious, but we just still wanted to kind of put these down here. And then, of course, raising the bar. These tier 1 companies, they want to hire somebody that's at or better the current levels or the people, right? Okay. All right, we'll go on. In terms of the DSA, the care structures and algorithm expectations, what the slide here is saying, like if it's a mid-level role, they'll get lead code medium and occasional hard problems. Now, these are not hard and fast rules, okay? You could get, even for a senior position, sometimes you could get a medium question, or even for a junior position, sometimes you could get a hard question, right? So I think there is a lot of variability on that. And to be honest, in my opinion, there's a bit of luck involved, right? It shouldn't be that way. I agree, but I'm just telling you how it is, right? So from your perspective, of course, you're preparing across the spectrum, but don't have any hard expectations on, hey, I have 2 years of experience and hence I should likely be getting a medium question. It could go either way. Okay. And then, for example, the second word here says Google is usually emphasizes on efficiency and how efficient is the algorithm. And Google does that. Google deals with a lot of data, but of course, so does every other company at this point, right? And so these are algorithms or solutions that have to work with huge amount of data. And that's where I mentioned earlier, a few minutes ago, I mentioned when you propose a solution, proactively talk about the costs, the time cost or the space cost, time space complexities and such. And this is an example of why we need to do that, because all these companies now deal with huge amounts of data. So if you propose an algorithm that's, I don't know, let's say quadratic complexity or even worse, exponential, it's just not going to work for real world data sizes, right? So you want to be able to show that. Yeah. But the bottom line is they are testing your computer science fundamentals, problem solving skills, coding skills. And for example, this IK program, this is whatever program that, and Rohan will probably talk about the details later, but whatever program is appropriate for you or whatever domain is appropriate for you, one thing is for sure that there's a lot of resources that get provided, and a lot of these things that we're talking about are happening on a daily basis essentially. And so it kind of gets ingrained in you that this is what I need to do, this is how I need to propose solutions or my approaches, etc., right?